to speak into the microphone because that's what the city attorney hears.
Okay. So, Deputy City Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Meyer?
Here.
Councilmember Wright?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Krupa?
Here.
Mayor Brown?
Here.
For the record, Councilmember Meyer, Percival is absent.
And I have a motion to excuse Councilmember Percival.
So moved.
And a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Wright?
Here. Yeah, yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Krupa?
Yes.
Mayor Brown?
Yes. We will now move to the public comment period. At this time, members of the public may only comment on an item appearing on the agenda. Please adhere to the following when addressing the council. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes or less, and comments should be directed to council as a whole and not directed to any individual council members. Deputy City Clerk, were there any electronic comments submitted to be read aloud for the work study?
Yes, Mayor Brown, there was one electronic comment submitted. It says, Dear members of the City Council and City Manager Lopez, my name is Brian Clenenden, a commercial property owner in Hemet. My company has recently constructed a building in the heavy industrial zone, and the second phase has been entitled. The area of both phases is consistent with areas other jurisdictions have deemed optimal for this use. We are in support of the city's initiative to move forward with developing a regulatory scheme to allow cannabis uses, and the council action to hire a trusted third party, HDL, to facilitate the cannabis process. As we move to the study session phase, we ask the city to consider allowing a micro-business use. Here is our reasoning. Property is zoned heavy industrial. We will be able to introduce cultivation and 2 distribution uses, and we could likely introduce a home delivery. With a micro-business, we can place all 3 uses efficiently under one roof. The property specified herein is not located near residents or schools. These 3 cannabis uses are properly placed within the heavy industrial zone: cultivation, distribution, home delivery, retail non-storefront. Home delivery is a favorable cannabis use. This is a desirable use from a city perspective. Disperses scale and intensity. Heavily regulated at state, generates meaningful tax revenue, appropriates safety for all COVID-19 new normal. Home delivery use is compatible with heavy industrial zone. There will be no customers, no public, no unauthorized site visits. The zone is intended for secure shortage and minimal small secure delivery vehicles. There are no parking impacts at this, as this is not a retail use. This will be a new ground to build, creating jobs, creating an increase in tax revenue base. This project will create jobs. Good paying jobs are also necessary. I have hired a team of subject matter experts to guide me in the process. A cannabis consultant, former chairman of the Planning Commission, to help guide the project in development and application submission. He has worked in many Southern California cities. A premier law firm that also guides cities in cannabis land use and regulatory schemes. An industry operator, well respected, and no cannabis violations. What we are looking for is a city that we can partner with as a best of breed operator, where the city provides the benefit of speed and a reasonable regulatory scheme. And to be competitive, the city must have a low tax burden and that competes with other jurisdictions in the state. End of comment.
What was his name?
Brian Clenenden? Clenenden?
I'll send it. Oh.
Okay. Are there any members of the public participating through teleconference that would like to comment on any work study item?
8:13.
So there are 2 members on the line.
Sorry,
Is anyone looking to submit a public comment?
Hello.
Yes, and your name is?
Dennis Fletcher.
Okay, go ahead with your comment.
Hello, this is Dennis Fletcher. I've appeared before the council in the past when I was connected to a couple local newspapers. I just wanted to let you all know that in conjunction with Eddie George, who's the publisher of Hemet Eye News, and photographer and contributor to the Chronicle in the past, Gina Estrin, we're going to be starting a Hammond News weekly program where we interview local homeless people in the Hammond and San Jacinto area. And we'll be conducting our first interview in our studio next Monday. Don't have an exact publication date, but probably should be within a week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. And is there another person on the line? Is there another caller on the line that wants to offer public comment on the work study item? Okay, hearing none, I'll turn it over to City Manager Lopez.
Thank you, Mayor. So as you'll recall, back in January, the council provided direction on to me to bring on a consultant to assist with establishing, guiding conversations with respect to a cannabis regulatory framework. In that time, we brought on board David McPherson from HDL, who's had extensive experience regulating as well as helping cities go through this process. With that, we're asking for a series of direction so that we can continue moving forward through this process. I should also note that we have an individual, a group that has submitted a ballot initiative in our community to the clerk's office, and so it's critically important that we gather as much information as we can as it relates to establishing this framework moving forward. There's a number of questions that have been laid out in the staff report. I will not be going over that, but we do have our consultant, David McPherson, on the line, who will be able to walk us through this presentation and also provide any sort of background information or additional detailed information with respect to this item. So David, are you on the line?
Yes, I am on the line.
Okay, thank you, David. So we'll go ahead and get this started. So David, I know that you're on the phone. Clay, our Deputy City Clerk, will be providing the forward motion on the PowerPoint. So just let him know when you need the next slide, and we'll go from there. Thank you, David.
Sure, appreciate that, City Manager. So Clay, just I'm on the covers page, and I say next if you can move when the time comes, since I can't view my PowerPoint and the video at the same time. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight and assist you on some of your discussion items today. And as the City Manager indicated, that you do have a citizen initiative intent for citizen initiative letter submitted to the City Clerk. And so keep in mind, part of the goal for tonight will be to address local control and the concerns of the citizen initiative to work collaboratively and strategically as part of your vision of bringing this to tonight. So I'd like to go to the next slide. So this slide that you see in front of you is a outline of just of the categories. And with that, just kind of a general understanding of the different activities, especially since somebody brought up a micro business type of business to you. So I want to remind you of what that is as well. But these are the licensed activities that are the state permits currently. So we've covered some of these, but I just want to go over a few of them. And the first one is the micro business that was brought up, which is also in the staff report. As you know, we get into discussion of zoning or zoning layouts, we can talk about that. But a micro business, by definition, is a business that either has cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and a dispensary or retailer. But it's only required to have 3 of the 4 elements to be classified as a micro business. So with that said, should the city say that they don't want to, like, for example, a cultivator, you still have 3 other elements or functions that would still have the qualifications for that. And so just take any one of those categories and keep that in mind when you think of the micro business. The other part of that is that if you decide to look at allowing a micro business to do retail, you have two types of options for a retail. You have retail, which is a traditional retail that has walk-in traffic, will require some kind of parking impact or could have a parking impact, therefore where you zone it becomes critical. Or the non-retail, which is like a delivery, it's just more of a storage facility where people will go online or call in to a number to request that something be delivered to them, in which case they would just pack things up and then get in a vehicle and then go deliver it. That is called a non-storefront retailer. And so that's two parts of a retail that you can look at for consideration as you look and discuss the micro-business component of this. Next slide. So this is a current list of all the state licenses that are out there. And I bring this to your attention for two reasons. One is that the market today is significantly saturated with cultivation and manufacturing throughout the state. However, each region has their opportunities to provide this to their counties and surrounding areas. And so we don't believe that you're going to see a run on a lot of volume of wholesale businesses. And the wholesale businesses, again, cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution, and some combination of micro businesses. So any concern of having a significant amount of numbers, we don't see happening in the current market. And we have recently had some cities that have closed their process with multiple activities, and 90% of the applications that were submitted were all related to the retail. And those are big cities and small cities, cities north, cities south, that this is occurring. So I just want you to feel comfortable that you're not going to have a run at a lot of business opening. And in fact, the city of Colton opened their cultivation process a month and a half ago, and they have not received, they've only received a few inquiries, but no applications to this point. So that kind of closer to home, we get a feel that there's not going to be a run to be over concerned with those types of activities. The next slide, please. So I share this with you, kind of the tier of where you're at today. Currently, you have to allow personal cultivation, and you currently have to allow out-of-town deliveries based on state regulation, although there is a lawsuit still out there with multiple cities, but that could be dragged out for some time in the future. And there's currently no storefront retailers or retails in town, which is, as I just shared with you, is the big golden ticket and related to this. But it also addresses another question to be asked, which we will talk about on the next slide. Next slide, please. So this really breaks down a little more on your thought process as policymakers. So you look on the left side, and that's the consumer demand. And I bring this to your attention is because even though you have a ban on a regulatory process today, is that you know that you have a consumer demand. And because there's a consumer demand, that is one policy question to ask yourself is, how do we want to continue addressing this consumer demand? Do we permit it, and at what level? Or do we not permit the retail side of that? The activities on the right side of the slide are all economic development type things, if you even get the businesses to come in and get up and running and be successful. And that is more the economic. So if you ignore the consumer demand issue and decide to only do the economic development side issue, you're still going to have an industry delivering and providing product to your consumer. So as you thoughtfully think through this, just keep those two types in mind. And I also want to point out, even though I showed generates jobs and generates revenue on the right side, it also is part of the retail and consumer demand types of operations as well. The next slide, please. So here's the story that we have today. So 5 years ago, when we were in a co-op and collective environment, we had 2,500 to 2,800 operators in California that were in a gray market, legal market, and somewhere in there between that were delivering or providing products, or people were going into retail stores. Since Prop 64 in that transition of a regulator world, we have moved to the far right, which is 642 licensed businesses in California. And I share that with you because of twofold. One is when we had that 2,500 to 2,800 businesses, we had a 6% or 13% consumer demand for this product. Today, we have 75% or less retail locations, but the consumer demand statewide is on average of 18 to 22%. So we've doubled almost, if not tripled, the consumer demand for this product, but yet we've taken 75% of their opportunity to do that away from them. Thus, today, we have went from a 30% illegal market to as high in some places as a 70% illegal market on the retail side. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a visual layout of the different types of retailers statewide of where those 642 permits are.
David,
Still there?
you still there?
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so, all right, I don't know quite you let me go to this. The next slide should be the one with the 928 retail and light and storefront. Okay, just make sure we're on the same page. So with that said, currently, Riverside County has 61 potential licenses, but the demand in the county has changed. And as we do our analysis today, it is anticipated that the population and consumer demand can absorb 111 conservatively retailers. So that means with the 58 retailers, you're still 53 retailers short in a total demand, the total demand for the county. And that's why you're going to have problematic with illegal activities unless there's more places for the consumer to go. Go to the next slide, please. So you can see here, in the redder the map is, the worse the issue is in the regions that are having a higher volume of illegal activity, but also do not have enough retail for the consumer demand. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that we're going to ask you at the end of here is, where do you want things zoned? And that becomes critical from both the wholesale businesses, as the letter that was read by the city attorney or from the city clerk at the beginning of our conversation about saying where something could be zoned and you know, someone interested in doing a micro business. So again, in a micro business scenario, one of the concerns we address in the staff report is where you would want these zoned if you permit it with a retail component, if you first allow it. And then secondly, if you do consideration of where it would be zoned because of the fact that if it has a retail walk-in traffic component of it, or if it has a retail non-walk-in traffic component of it, there's two different places of where you would want to zone that. And these are just some of the zones that we brought up for discussion. Now, if you do specifically just retail without any other activity, consideration might be a C1 or C2, or you can also move it into some of the other zones depending where your concern is of where it can be if you permit it at all, part of the discussion. Next slide, please. So based on the direction that you provide to staff and us tonight, we will come back with a best practice ordinance for your consideration that will address the time, place, and manner, and the best practices associated with all the things that are associated with this regarding security, odor mitigation, safety, signage, time someone can be in business, and how the buffer zones would be associated with anything associated with that. So those will be there for further discussion, depending on the direction you provide staff of the types of activities in the buffers. Next slide, please. So here's where we get to talk a little bit about the buffer zones. Statewide currently states that the youth facilities, schools, and daycares the buffers must be 600 feet from a licensed facility, or, this is the key to it, or as determined by the local jurisdiction. So if you wish to make it less or more, you can do that, depending on your consideration, which I'll give you an example on our next slide. Next slide, please. So this is a buffer options for you, which I think I have shared with you in the past. Look at it from two perspectives. One, the current graph as shown shows a 600, 500, and 400 feet ring. So you can bring it in closer if you're trying to expand more potential locations, or if you have concern regarding one of the sensitive buffers, take those rings and reverse engineer them and say the center one is 600 feet, the second one is 800 feet, and the third one is 1,000 feet. So you can go farther out, or you can bring it in closer to 600 feet. Also keep in mind that you can break those categories up. For example, you could say, I want it to be 1,000 feet from a K-12 school, or maybe just the junior high and the high schools. But for a daycare, you may say, I'm okay if it's closer because it's less of a concern of kids being accessed because they've got higher supervision and it's not an impact to them regarding where you are philosophically on this. And the same thing with youth facilities for that as well. So those are three ways to mix it up, or ways you can cut this farther out or in. Next slide, please. So the question will come up in two parts. I think the letter actually mentioned one of the things is about taxes. But first I want to talk about the fees. The staff report addresses part of the fiscal impact that all the costs associated that should you move forward with applicants and you get the appropriate amount of applicants, is that all the fees, including our contract, which is noted in the staff report, and staff's time associated with this, the goal would be that it would be 100% cost recovery. And therefore, not only the ordinance should indicate that, and a fee study would reflect that, but you would also do that by resolution. On the right side of the slide, I modified this to say your general tax has already been adopted, but when you did pass the tax, you established caps that were significantly high for the time may have been appropriate. But in today's environment, if you're trying to encourage the good actors and incentivize some economic incentives for business to come to your town, then it would be appropriate to consider looking at bringing the tax, what are the prevailing rates in today's environment, in order to, one, make them competitive, and two, to encourage good applicants to apply in the city as part of your process. Next slide, please. So what I've done here, and this is not suggesting this will be a timeline. This just kind of is a guide of the steps, but also kind of give you a basic. It could be expanded out more months or time depending on some logistical things like what we're doing today with the COVID and your concerns with other priorities that might be on your agenda right now. But if in general, just the checklist of things kind of in steps. The first thing would be is tonight, provide direction to staff to come back with an ordinance to address some of the things that we're talking about, analyze some of the buffers and what that can do with the recommendations, drop the regulatory ordinance and have that prepared to be vetted both by staff and the attorney, and then bring it back to you. Prepare to change the zoning ordinance. So if you permit in certain zones, they're going to have to go through the Planning Commission in order to have the zoning ordinance changed. So we have to prep for that and schedule that as part of step one. Next slide, please. In step two things to think about is, one, as we shared with you, is that in order to incentivize some of the business to come in town, you kind of want to know what the opportunities are and cost elements of this are. So we could bring back to you a recommended reduction of the tax rates so that people know that your intent in to incentivize them to apply in town, knowing that you're meeting them and collaborating with that. And then, again, go to the Planning Commission with the changes to the zoning ordinance, and then come back to you with the Planning Commission's recommendations and conduct the study sessions related and public hearings related to both the regulatory and zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. And as part of step three, that's where there will be a more further discussion, more focused on it once the ordinance has been more defined and clear of what expectations and type of businesses. Come back with you with a merit-based application process with more defined policies and procedures, which will be done and approved by you by resolution, so you are very satisfied with the process and understand the outcome. And we recommend a merit-based process, assuming that the presumption will be that you will be limit the number of permits, and therefore, if some of them, such as the retail, get competitive and you have more than the number, more applicants than the number of permits, then you have some kind of decision process in order to address this. And we've made some improvements to some of the process that affect that. For example, appeals, procedural things, clear defined things that pass a few samples of cities that have ran into challenges, and the ordinance that we would present to you would resolve and have some resolution to some of those, make it a little cleaner. And then establish the fees, which we talked about already, to make for the application process, so make a cost recovery and the applicant knows what the fees are. And then the length of time for that process in which the applications would be open. Typically, it's a minimum of 45 days. There is a lot of documentation that the applicant puts together, but at the same time, not to put too much of a burden on staff, and that's the range we recommend that's been very comfortable to work with. Next slide, please. So these are the questions that we're going to ask from you. They were in the staff report to get some kind of a decision tree on the next steps. And so at this time, I'd like to turn this back over to the city manager for the further direction and questions.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that presentation. So as the policy direction that has been laid out on the screen, 5 main areas that we would like direction on. The first one, and we'll have an opportunity to ask David some follow-up questions if the council has any. The first question is, what types of cannabis businesses should the city of Hemet allow? That's the first item. The second item, how many of each type should be allowed, or should there just be a cap on the total number of businesses permitted? The third item, where should each type of business be allowed? The fourth, what sensitive buffers and additional restrictions should be placed on each type of business? And then 5, what type of application process should be developed? There are a couple of items that were particularly of concern to some individuals that submitted the initial initiative or request to circulate the petition to the clerk's office, and those really revolved around making sure that there were good actors that the city would be considering. That should be embodied or incorporated within the application process that would become relevant in the future. But there was a really big desire from the individuals that are putting forward the initiative to make sure that they're good actors, as well as individuals that are invested in the community to be able to be allowed to go through the process. I think those are 2 key items that the council should be thinking about, because I think it's really relevant to this conversation. And so those are ideas, concepts that the council should be thinking about. With that being said, does the council have any questions, follow-up items with respect to those 5 areas that are listed on the PowerPoint screen? Are there any other things that you would like David to clarify or weigh in on as we start wading through these 5 items?
Carly?
Okay, my first question is on the buffer zones. If there's state law and we're dealing all with COVID and all of the state laws, and we're allowed to make things tighter but not looser, how can we make a buffer zone less than the state law? I can understand if we want it to be larger. That's my first question.
So, yes. So actually you can make it less. You can make it all the way to 25 feet. What the state law says is that it will be the 600 feet or as determined by the local jurisdiction. The only caveat to it is it must be from property line to property line. You can't do it from back door to front door, or from one property line to the front door of it and the measurement. It must be from that. So you can reduce that if you had a problem.
Okay. And then my other question, and I don't know if this is necessarily to you, but in our staff report it was talking about how industrial areas are not recommended. Maybe that's just by our staff, but I know that it's common to have in industrial areas, because if it's in a regular shopping area, then you're going to have families and kids and other people walking by that wouldn't necessarily be in an industrial area. So I don't agree with the staff report.
Could you shed light on that that concept, please?
But my point is that if there's not security and there's not this and then there's not that, and they want to be here so bad, they'll provide all of that. So if there's ways to get around it. If we want them to not be in the beaten path of everyone else shopping, they can provide cameras that, work with our police department even, so that it's under surveillance. They can provide security guards. They can provide whatever types of, even like we asked RTA to provide, right, for the transportation center. Things like that. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily off the table. We would just have to put more restrictions in place, which probably would, no matter where it went, right? So, yes, please tell me what you're thinking on this.
So essentially what we've laid out, obviously, is, that's only a recommendation. When David jumps on, he can provide some more detail. But it's simply the recommendation. If the council chooses to allow, other things that aren't in the staff's recommendation, well, that's the council's prerogative to do that. We're merely looking out for the recommendation.
But explain your thinking. That's what I want.
Sure.
I want to understand what you guys are looking at, because I'm not looking at that.
Sure. So that's obviously the
sorry.
council's prerogative. David, are you back on the call?
Yes, I am. I apologize. I accidentally my fat fingers hit that. So to address what the question I heard before I got off was that typically wholesale businesses will be in industrial zones. The issue really is where you would want to permit potentially any retail activity where there's walk-in traffic, right? If the concern is you don't want them at your traditional retail location, which is natural location for them for the purposes of parking, lighting. You know, if you have a patrol car going through them, there's more visibility. It tends to attract people for the other businesses because we have found in some degree where there may be empty retail locations is that someone's willing to move in those other retail locations because a retailer, cannabis retailer, is pulling in more volume of traffic to that mall or that strip mall or that area. And so, which case, you know, it's a like-for-like type business around that, complementing and supplementing each other's traffic activity for retail activities.
Well, I will tell you that I have 2 empty strip malls by my house, and I'll be damned if they go in there.
And that is the policy discussion that, you know, for council to make. I'm just saying, let you know the pros and cons of it.
I'm just saying, like, we had an illegal one across Florida Avenue from our house, and I get the difference. But what it did to my neighborhood that was, you know, 500 to 1,000 feet away was ravishing. And we're not going to live through that again. I wouldn't expect or put on that to any other neighborhoods. I mean.
Linda?
Microphone. When you were talking, you had a slide on, or talked about the distribution within the state on the number of legal cultivation company or businesses. What is the? Did you have a slide where with distribution by area? I mean, is there more cultivation in the southern part of California or northern part? And what was that breakdown? Because I noticed on one slide you had the breakdown of illegal distribution and growing and whatever, but what about the legal part?
So first I would like to clarify that we said legal or is on the retailer. Distribution is not retail. It's not a seller to the end consumer. Distribution is selling it from or is the business that picks up the product and just moves it from one licensee to another. So if a cultivator is in Northern California, a distributor picks it up and may move it to a manufacturer in the city of Hemet to make into an oil. That's what a distributor is.
Okay, I used the wrong word. When I was referring to the distribution within the state, I was at what areas of California have the highest rate of cultivation businesses?
And that is Northern California. Northern California and the 3 counties that have probably 70% of the cultivation market is Humboldt, Santa Barbara, and Trinity are the 3 highest cultivators in the state. There are cultivators that are slowly progressing, as you may be aware. Riverside, San Bernardino, and San Diego counties were one of the driest cannabis industry licensees, and they're slowly getting up to a speed to at least now compete with cultivation for indoor cultivation. The county themselves has permitted 50, and San Bernardino has opened it up, and there are surrounding cities that have done that. So as they move up and add to that count, you will then have more in those 3 counties.
Okay. That's all I've got for right now.
Bonnie?
So, my concern is with the dispensaries. I mean, we spent a ton of money closing dispensaries for a good reason. Manufacturing doesn't scare me as much as dispensaries do. I think that I'd like us to go a little slower and not think that we have to do everything, that we have to have one because we have the other, and rather than, and the industry is changing so much. I don't think we can control the sales in a dispensary, or the way it's set up now, could we even begin to think that we were getting revenue that we should be able to get, because it's not regulated as it should be for retail sales. And they can tell us anything from, for that matter. So when it comes to manufacturing, so does it have more in Northern California because of the climate, or does it have more because of the open available land, or just because they have less population?
Well, it's a little all of that, but primarily was because when it was very much an illegal activity, it was easy for them to hide and have less impact from that. And there's growers that go back 4 generations associated with that. Outdoors, obviously, going to be cheaper. They cycle it 6 months of the year, and they can grow outdoors. And it's cheaper because of energy, water, things of that nature. I also remind you, though, that, as I mentioned as part of the example, down the street, Colton, who basically has unlimited amount of cultivation and has not been able to get one applicant to come in the door. So just comparison of what activities there may or might be you may want to do, it's also a matter of is there a demand for it. I also shared with you another major city that, because the process hasn't been public yet, but it's in Ventura County, has gotten all their applications and closed the door and get one application for anything other than retail out of 50 to 60 applicants that they received.
Wow.
So there's just not as much industry desire to do that, unless as a whole, but there are obviously people of interest that feel strongly about finding an opportunity in your community, which is great, but that it's not going to be a rush to all those activities other than the retail.
Yeah,
we don't have enough retailers, and it won't.
There's no control over the sales. I mean, they could sell, $2 million worth of product and only tell us they sold $500,000.
So that becomes part of the program administration that obviously, we would want to look at potentially HDL that would assist with that, and knowing that, if a group has a facility that's 10,000 square feet, there's numbers that could be used to help provide a better idea as to whether the information we're getting is accurate or not, and HDL could assist with that moving forward.
That's good to know. That's all I have for now.
Appreciate your concern on the retail, but there is a lot of oversight to them, not only from a security standpoint, but they're also required to maintain everything in a metrics, in a POS system, and then based on a lot of models that are done, as Chris kind of alluded a little bit, is that we look at things forensically, not just from what's in the till or what's in the bank. We monitor it from various different components of that. It's a lot tighter today than which typically it saw 5 or 7 years ago when it was just a co-op and collective, and there wasn't much oversight to the business operators.
So do you think that the reason there isn't very much request for cultivation is because of the cost that it is? Because, when we toured Desert Hot Springs, that facility alone was $20 million. So
I appreciate, and that has changed quite a bit, but at the same time, they're a first mover in cultivation. So a lot of those, and we oversee those businesses, by the way, so we do have an understanding of the dynamic that they were first movers of cultivation. And secondly, again, as I share with you, if there's only 632 retail stores in California, and the first movers are up with all those permits up the north, there's right now, they can't move their product to market. They got nowhere to send it to, that people already have a relationship with existing retailers. There's no penetration for them to actually get their product to market. And that's part of the challenge. 75% of the businesses will not get up and running and have a place to put the market. And in the last 3 years, there's been a 65% failure of wholesale businesses in California from various degrees.
Thank you.
That all for now? All right, David. Just a few questions. First of all, just an observation. I'm not surprised that Northern California counties kind of have the market cornered for cultivation for all the reasons you explained, and they've got decades worth of experience doing the illegal grows up there. The question I have is a little more abstract, and I'm not sure if you can give me any percentages or anything, but it's my sense that initially after Prop 64 there was a perception among a lot of local governments that this industry could potentially represent a new revenue stream. And I think they were looking at expensive permit fees and license fees and sales-generated revenue. And I think one of the reasons that I personally wanted to hold off a little bit to see what the industry was doing and what the experience was in other cities and how it compares in the marketplace versus what we know is a very busy industry illegally. And you get to the point, and you mentioned earlier about the revenue-generating strategies. You've got to come up with just the right pricing mechanism, because if you get carried away with the fees and the licensing, that's a disincentive for somebody to have a legal business, and it seems to me that it would stand to reason that it would incentivize the illegal market. Is that a fair statement?
That's a good observation on your part. Yeah, that's kind of where it's at.
So with that in mind, is your experience such that you've got a pretty good sense of a formula that could be utilized to help us establish what our permit fees would be, license fees, et cetera?
Yeah, so we kind of have a general ballpark of what would be an initial fee, and then what historically, when we've done fiscal analysis for ongoing regulatory fees, part of it will determine on the number of permits that you permit or allow. And as I shared a little bit, I think in the report that South put together, is the types of activities. Let's just assume for discussion purposes, not that I'm recommending this, but if you say somewhere in the baby steps of 2 to 3 types of businesses across different categories, or made a combination of a cap, and we're big on that cap more than combination of saying 2 cultivation, 2 manufacturer, 2 retailers. Of course, retailer has a different line we'll talk about separately, but we've had situations where you could have 5 outstanding manufacturers apply, but you only have 2 permits. And then you may have 0 cultivation, and now you've only got 2 permits in town versus 5. Versus if he said for wholesale, we're going to allow up to 8 to 10 wholesale businesses, which gives you flexibility of taking best of breed that apply without restricting it to one or limiting it to one category. And then on the retail side, retail is really is based on the consumer side of it. So, for example, your population. If you took your population and said, okay, we'll divide that by 18,000 or 22,000, which somewhere in that range is an average of a retailer, what would that give you? Right, that could give you 2 to 4 retailers that your community can support, sustain a business. and yet that gives you, a decision process of, okay, well, how many would I want? Do I want 4? Do I want 2? That'll give you a ballpark, at least what, regionally in your community that you could have that would be sustainable. You could do less or more, that's your prerogative, but that kind of gives you an analysis on the retail side. And then on the other side, if you kept it in that range of 8 to 10, you may or not even get 8 to 10 applicants on the wholesale side. You may get 2. At least you've got to control the number of activities that you would be comfortable and what we think that would provide you reasonable revenues. If you brought the rates down, it would encourage good actors to come into town.
Yeah, and I got that sense from reading the staff report that the concept of having a cap and not necessarily specifying a number of specific types could be advantageous going forward. You mentioned that 90% of the applications being submitted now are for retail, and Riverside County currently has a retail shortage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So when you're talking about retail, that includes storefront retail and delivery retail, or is that percentage different for delivery retail?
It basically for every non-storefront retailer, because they can do less, deliveries, you have to have a lot more volume of vehicles, and people may or may not, comfort with that. The non-storefront retailers typically take about 30% of the market of the retail, and I think the COVID situation has made people readdress the strategy behind that because of people having to want stuff delivered to them.
Okay. Was there any aspect? I think several years ago, when the city conducted a survey of opinions of our residents about cannabis, I seem to recall it was pretty close to a 50-50 split, pro and con. And there was a pretty high percentage of people that were in favor of cannabis, but they specified medicinal cannabis, not recreational. Do you have any sense of what that market represents?
Well, the market has changed a lot since you've done that poll, more or less to the fact that they're more educated and more informed of what it is, and there's been more of the normalization of cannabis as being in the mainstream, is we're seeing more of a change that up to 70% of the consumers are adult use and not medicinal. Although they may be taking it for medicinal purposes, they don't want to go through all the hoops of getting a doctor's recommendation or a county card for that purpose.
I see. Well, I think just, philosophically, I'm kind of in Carly's court about storefront operations. I know that you said that having a storefront retail could perhaps attract other businesses to help fill out vacant space, but and maybe it's just my old school way of thinking, but I don't particularly relish seeing a nice strip mall and have, for example, a smoke shop right there where you're encouraging people to come in and buy cigars and cigarettes and tobacco products. So I'm not so sure that having a storefront retail in a strip mall would necessarily entice the kind of businesses that I'd want to see in a strip mall in my close proximity to my neighborhood. So I'm kind of in the same ballpark that you are on that concern, which causes me to lean more towards delivery retail. If retail is the marketplace that we need to go, I'm just thinking something that the consumers know where the markets are, they know how to access the product, and if it can be set up in a legal process where the city can cover its costs for processing the applications and have a percentage of revenue stream coming in. I think that's kind of where my personal preference is about what I'd like to see us look at. So that's all the comments I have right now. Go ahead.
And just on that, so keep in mind that you could move this into industrial areas. It's not saying that you can't. You know, your concern is you don't want it in the retail locations. Just moving it in a commercial manufacturing